Welcome to episode 86 of Slightly Unmeditated, a casual talk podcast about the WTFs of spirituality, self-improvement, and motivation with a lifelong delusional optimist who used to suck at meditation. I'm Tisha, and joining me today is Shawn Murphy. He is an aerospace engineer, a philosopher, a spiritual coach, and the author of Torn Between Two Worlds. So first I want to say welcome. Thank you for joining me, Shawn.
Tisha, it's a pleasure to be here today.
There's so much going on with you that I kind of just need to hear your story from your own mouth because I think one of the most fascinating parts for me of doing this show is meeting, like, you're an engineer, you know, there's a personality often associated with that. I've had some PhDs on here who seemingly have, like you say on your website, actually, you're able to speak to a different kind of audience about spirituality. So I'm curious, first of all, how you came to your spiritual path. Is it something that you knew as a child, or is it something that happened as you got older?
Well, when I was growing up as a little child, everybody said that I was going to be an engineer. Mm-hmm. I was, took things apart and then I put them back together and they still worked.
Right.
So by the time I was 14, I grew up in a Roman Catholic family, very strict Roman Catholic environment. And I used my engineer mind on what they were teaching me. And I said, this isn't right. This doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're talking about the love of God on one side and then the way people behave on the other. So at the age of 14, I left the Catholic Church. And by the time I finished college, I had tried out 18 different religions, including Hinduism and Buddhism, which I liked the most. But that was my first spiritual awakening at 14, which forced me to look in different places. And then it was about a year before my daughter was born, when I was 35, that I got this great desire to study everything I could. I had moved to Europe. I learned the German language, and I started studying philosophy, started studying history of the church, and spirituality. And one thing is that I've always been a work study-aholic. Mm-hmm. In other words, I worked my way through high school, through college, through my master's degree, through my MBA, and through my CFA. So I've always been working and learning my whole life.
Right.
So I was working in Europe and learning about spirituality. And 26 years ago, I went to my first spiritual retreat, which turned out to be exactly 1 month before my daughter was born, mm-hmm. in the 28th week, with 2 pounds and 2 ounces.
Wow.
This drive that came to me a year before she was born, I realized what it was for. That this girl was going to be something special, and I had to be prepared as a father to work with her.
Right.
And of course, that was the case. We'll talk about some of those stories along the way.
Sure.
When she was 5, she went to visit her mother, or my mother, her grandmother. And after the visit, I talked to my mom, and my mom said, "She's just a loving, caring, so sweet little child. You used to be like that. What happened?" And it was that conversation that sent me on a new search, searching for my inner child, searching for the lost 14 years of my childhood.
Was she saying you're too serious?
No, but it's just the way she said it.
Okay.
Because my daughter is truly, she's an empath. She's loving, caring. And to think that I was once like that just really, really bothered me.
Right.
Okay, so I went searching. I went through the Mankind Project. I went to the Hoffman process. I've been through I've been through 25 week-long retreats in the Swiss Alps. But I went searching for my lost childhood. I never found it, but I found out a lot of other things about myself. Mm. And that's what I write in my last book, is how important self-discovery is.
Right.
And then 5 years ago, when my daughter was 20, she had a stroke.
Oh, my goodness.
While she was in college, and she lost her ability to speak. The stroke was in the left frontal cortex, and something very strange happened to me again. Is I came home from the hospital, I sat down at my computer, and I wrote 3 books in 6 months. She had lost her ability to speak, and I was pushed to tell my truth.
Right.
So I wrote the first 3 books in the Torn Between Two Worlds series, and this, then as I was out publicizing those books, I became a contributor to Quora, which is a platform that I really enjoy because I'm answering people's questions with the knowledge that I've gained in the last 54 years or so of my studying.
Yeah, you have a lot. I did look at it. You have a lot of information on there and a lot of people reading it. So I never really thought about that before, like using that as a platform to kind of get information out. It never occurred to me. And I'm an online writer in real life. So I was kind of surprised when I opened it up and saw how much information there was.
Yes, it's the most rewarding because it's mostly real people with real questions.
Right.
I mean, there are some kooks there, but there's kooks everywhere.
Yeah.
But seriously, and they're people with real questions, and I got to know a lot of people with serious spiritual ailments, and that's what forced me, I guess, let's put it that way, to write my last book, which is a self-help book. It's a spiritual healing book, which brings together all of my learnings. I've studied under 2 spiritual healers. I've worked with about 5 clairvoyants over my past years. I've mentored a few clairvoyants.
Interesting.
One automatic writing medium that I'm mentoring. But so I wrote this book, and I after I published it, I was just so proud of myself. And then I thought, oh shit! Now I'm going to have people coming to me with these questions, and what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I'm an engineer. I've got a full-time day job, a couple of full-time day jobs, and I need somebody to help me to work with these people who have real spiritual ailments.
Right.
And I started looking. I started interviewing actually a couple of spiritual healers, and I realized pretty quickly that I was the one who needed to help them.
Mm. Yeah.
So in November of last year, I started offering my services to people, mainly people through Quora, who are concerned about being possessed or about strange dreams, or have a spiritual gift that the world isn't recognizing.
Right. So that's what I was going to ask. The people that you're meeting on the platform, I'm not 100% certain how it works, but I've read it myself. So do you seek out people's questions, or do they come to like a page that's yours to ask a question?
Well, the Quora it's about people asking questions.
Right.
And then other people answer those questions.
I got that part, but I didn't know if they asked you directly, or are you just sort of seeking the questions that you can answer and answer it for people?
I answer the questions where I have an expertise, where I have knowledge in the history of religion or in spirituality.
And do you think the people asking the questions that are spirituality related realize that they're spirituality related? Or are they
No,
just
some of
sort
them
of
don't.
lost?
No,
Okay. Yeah.
no, some of them don't.
Yeah.
And then, then I can get into a kind of an offline discussion with them.
Right.
In other words, my answer perks their interest, and then they contact me directly.
Right. So one of the things that I like to do on the show is ask, the healers, the energy workers that I'm talking to, why people come to them. Because I think people that are listening are still sort of new and learning. And that's my point. I want to sort of introduce things that are less scary, taking the woo out of woo-woo, right? So that's why I asked people who accidentally find out, well, this is a spiritual issue that I have, and I had no clue that this was even on the table. I'm just wondering, are you saying that there's a lot of people like that who, once the spirituality door is open, they're like, oh, I see a lot clearer than I ever could have before?
Not maybe as clear as they think, but at least they acknowledge that it could be that, because a lot of these people have, been on traditional medications for schizophrenia or depression or ADHD or whatever it is, and the drugs aren't working. They all they do is dull their mind. They don't help them to overcome the symptoms,
right? Because
they're spiritual symptoms.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's why I was curious how many people are seeking it on a spiritual level, or are they just saying, like, I'm tired of my depression and the medication isn't working? That's how I was wondering. If
most are more like that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because I'm imagining, like, if someone comes into the question, well, this depression could be around your spirituality, and how many people are like, oh, nope, I'm out. Like, they're not interested in hearing it. I'm fascinated because everything that I'm learning is so interconnected. And as a person who struggled with anxiety for much of her life, deep anxiety, I'm so eternally grateful that the path that I'm taking and the things I'm learning have decreased that so much that some days I'm like, wow, I haven't been anxious in so long that I can't even remember. And it's just a few techniques that I've learned over the last year and a half of doing the show that have helped me so enormously that sometimes I can't even believe it's for real.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as you said, I'm an engineer, so I look at the laws that exist behind spirituality and how you can work within those laws.
Right.
For instance, and I have research that backs up everything that I suggest. The work that Immortal has done on the impact of thought on water is a very important piece of research, and understanding the power of thought and the power of negative energy. You can use that in your healing. You can also use the power of the right crystals in your healing.
Yeah.
You can use the power of nature in your healing. There's all sorts of different tools that you can use, and anybody can use them. They're non-addictive. They're they're not poison or whatever. They just bring positive energy into your life.
Do you have a Cliff Note version of what the power of thought on water is? I'm not sure I know. I mean, it doesn't have to be super detailed. I was just curious for my own self.
If you look up Masamori Emoto on Facebook, you'll see his water experiments that they're doing.
Okay.
And what he did, and he spent his life doing it, is he exposed water to different environments. Mm-hmm. Okay. He did a whole bunch of series on types of music. He did a series on thoughts. He did a series on, just taking a glass of water and writing words on the glass and seeing what impact that had.
Wow.
Then he took that water and froze it and created crystals. And the most beautiful crystals come from the words forgiveness, gratitude, and love. And the most beautiful crystals are formed out of Johann Sebastian Bach, which is, if you know what's done in what do you call it, disabled children, they use music therapy in helping disabled children. Well, that same music will help anybody.
Right.
It doesn't help disabled children. The right type of music. So
Right.
that there's a lot of research on this, and it's done by a number of different researchers. And just the power. I mean, you think, and this is the cliff note, is that we're 70% water.
Right.
Right. So when you tell your child that they're no good, you know, whatever you're saying negative to them, that negative energy is affecting their whole being. And you can see it happen when you say it to them.
Right.
So we need to fill our lives with positive energy. And, you know, everybody says that, but I can show you the research behind it, right? I can show you that it works.
Right. And that's exactly why I asked that question, because it's that kind of a brain zinger that sticks in your mind, so that the next time you're out around somebody who's irritating you, whether it's your children or your pets or whatever it is, maybe somewhere that will cross your mind, like 70% water, beautiful crystals, like those little nuggets of information. That's the stuff that I remember very clearly. And then the more I'm learning, the more it's transforming every single day. And then you make that sort of leap, and one day you're like, holy cow, my whole brain feels different. My thought process is completely different. You know, the energy feels completely different. Oh, it's I wish I could just download information into other people's brains, because I can't even no longer verbalize, you know, things that have been happening. So I gotta keep taking the woo out of woo woo. When you wrote your books, was it based entirely on research, or was it any kind of intuitive, like channeling kind of situation happening?
It's all based on, you know, the life works of many, many people.
Right.
Having said that, the way that I wrote it, it was inspired. I mean, I would wake up one day with a chapter in my head. I'd sit down and write it. And then I'd wake up the next day and I didn't have a chapter, so I did something else.
No, that's kind of what you got to do, right? Yeah. No,
as I said, that the original thing was what it just came out of me. Right. You know, to write these. I just started writing, and it's as it went on, I realized these are 3 separate themes that I'm writing about, so I have to separate them into 3 different books.
Right. So now the fourth part of that is a self-help, where it actually provides, you know, guidance for someone to. Is it guidance for someone newly awakening, or sort of across the board?
It's guidance for anybody. I mean, the recommendations that I make in the second half of the book about healing methods, anybody can use it to increase their energy. The way that I wrote it was specifically for victims of spiritual ailments, or the people around those victims. Because very often somebody who's stuck in depression, they can't find their way out of it. They need help, right? Or somebody who is suffering from schizophrenia, they need people around them to help them.
Right.
So the first half of the book describes all the ailments that I've come across in my life that are spiritually based. Whether it's an ailment that came from a past life, or if it's an ailment that is a question of possession. And there's many, many different types of possession. There's some
Oh,
very good books about the lost souls, basically, materialistic people who die, who maybe are an alcoholic, they're a drug addict, they're a sex addict, and they just hang around after they die, and they're trying to get a fix, and they get their fix by attaching themselves to other addicts.
I was not expecting the conversation to go in this direction. So that's kind of fascinating. Wow. I don't even know what question to ask because I'm going to process that for the next few days. But it never really thought about that. I tend to be a little bit freaked out by some stuff. I will start overthinking darkness and dark energy. I tend to not even focus on it. I've had some scary experiences and I just choose to not like put my attention there, right? So that's why I was not expecting you to say
Okay.
that.
Well,
I don't mind talking about it, just,
Well, there's many different types because, as you said before, asking me about people on Quora, I mean, people will ask me, "Am I possessed by a demon?" That is usually not the case,
right.
but the other cases are not so easy either. The two psychologists that I reference in my work are Dr. Carl Wicklund and Dr. Edith Fiore, who spent their lives depossessing people. And the majority of the possessions were their mother, their sister. They were relatives who they didn't want to lose, right? So when they died, they called them to themselves.
Oh my God.
Okay. And this kind of possession it's benign, really. It can go on for years, and because it's not evil, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're living with your sister for 30 years, it can drive you crazy.
Right.
But there's some examples that I put in the book, but I recommend people read those two books because they spent their lives dealing with these issues. And I'll show you a picture. Yeah, that's a little scary a little bit. So.
Oh, yeah, that's scary.
This is a picture in my book, just to describe that. Very often, it's multiple things going on at the same time.
Right.
This is a picture of a woman who had given herself to a hypnotist. So she gave her will to another person. So that person has power over her because she didn't take her will back. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And she also, she missed her mother, so she wanted her mother to stay with her. So she had all of these outside influences in her life, and it takes a while to get rid of them.
So this is why I don't talk about the dark side very much because my immediate reaction is I'm doing everything wrong and something bad is going to happen, right? Like that's immediately where my mind goes. I don't know how to do this. And I don't. So once I sort of cleared away from that, I feel much better about myself. And I know intention is part of a lot of it. But I'm always afraid of unintentionally doing, quote unquote, something wrong.
No, I understand exactly what you mean. When I wrote this book, I wrote it in honor of Dr. Edward Bach. If you know what the Bach flower remedies are.
I do not.
Bach wrote a little book. It's called Heal Thyself. And he writes in his book that, modern medicine has gone astray. We don't, we're just treating symptoms. And, some people it works, the treatment works for some people. It doesn't work for other people.
Right.
He wrote that in 1890. Okay. And that's still true today. Right. And especially in the area of mental health, the success rate in mental health is very, very low.
Yeah.
And it's because mental health is very often spiritually based. And if you don't address the underlying spiritual issues, you'll never overcome it. You can spend your life pleasantly numb, as
right.
Pink Floyd said, but if you want to overcome
mental health is still a stigma. People are, they don't. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday I was talking about healthcare in the United States, and they were saying how mental health isn't even necessarily covered. Like, they were talking about how the difference between, your teeth aren't covered by your medical insurance. It's a whole separate part of your body, and how stupid the whole process is. And then they were talking about mental health and not even really having a lot of resources for different kinds of things that so clearly we need. And it's still like a stigma. It's still embarrassing. It's still, you're on some level treated like a criminal for, seeking help for yourself outside of spirituality. I mean,
yes. And kind of that's why I've focused on this area, because it's an area that is near and dear to my heart. I have relatives who have various issues, and I've been exposed to that. I've been exposed to it with different people I've met, and they aren't being handled correctly by the medical system, as you said.
Well, I do write medical content for doctor websites, is what I do in real life. And I'm noticing it's not, the norm, but I'm noticing a lot more practices opening or changing into more of a holistic approach, that they'll actually even recommend spiritual practices, or at least holistic ways of dealing with a lot of issues, instead of just saying we have a pill for that. So it's fascinating that while I'm talking about some of this stuff, I'm actually writing about it in the real world as well, because doctors are catching on, yes, or at least other kinds of practitioners are catching on. And, of course, the more I learn, the less woo-woo all of that stuff is. I see how they're all interconnected and how miraculous everything really is. And people are just so used to seeing the surface part of that. They don't, they don't see any other way out except go to a doctor and get some pills.
Yeah, I know. I was with my wife at the cardiac surgeon, and he was explaining the mitral valve replacement that he was going to do, and he said it's a 97% success rate. And I said, could we get to that success rate in mental health?
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about how far medicine has come on the mechanical side, that's all mechanical, right? But hasn't really advanced on the mental or spiritual side.
I mean, it's like
stood still.
Literally chemicals in your brain and all of this stuff, and it's still so commonplace as, oh, you're crazy. And as someone who went through that, a lot of my anxiety started. I had really premature menopause, so my hormones were crazy. And I ended up going to an endocrinologist. I've told the story a million times on the show. And after the hormone therapy didn't work, within a week, I started having panic attacks, which was new for me, and it didn't make any sense to me. And so the endocrinologist essentially immediately just wrote me off that I should seek behavioral health care. Never addressed the issues why I felt so poorly taking a couple of hormones. No, never even. She's a freaking endocrinologist. And she just told me basically I was crazy and she couldn't help me. And ever since then, I've had a real kind of a grudge about all of that. And I'll tell any person willing to listen to that story how, messy all that can be. Of course, it's much better now that I've had my spiritual training. It's getting better every day. But the average person who doesn't sort of seek out that kind of help either is left in an institution because of their hormones being out of whack.
That's true. I mean, It's crazy the amount of people who are in institutions and really shouldn't be there. One part of my book, which I'm working on publicizing much more, is for me the way to approach this mental health issue is in childhood, and in early childhood, and up to 5 years. And we can, it's the best return on investment of spending time before they get into school to help them find their right path, their type of learning, what they're passionate about, and making sure that they have a full life. Because, one of the biggest causes of depression is living with a soul that wants to do something and can't do it.
Yeah.
Right? If they want to be an artist and are working as an accountant, I saw many of those when I was living in Bermuda, actually. The only job was accountant, so everybody had to be accountant. But after a couple of years of doing that, they were going crazy. Because they're creative, they want to do something different.
So that thought process has always been in me. I have been a fervent believer in a follow your dreams, figure out what you want to do and do it. If it doesn't work out, then find out what else you want to do. Like, I could not be the 9 to 5 till I die, whatever. That was never in the cards for me. From a child, I knew that. Anybody who knows me will tell you that. And so I'm realizing now how much of an impact that probably has on so many people around me that are living in that kind of way. And then they'll say, oh, I really wish I could be. And I get so frustrated, like, then go be that. So I've always been a lifelong proponent of it. And I'm understanding now how spirituality, I might have just had an epiphany. I'm understanding now how spirituality sort of plays into that, into helping the dreamers follow their dream and their path. So people who are talking to you online, is it mostly mental health crises, or is it like a dark night of the soul where they don't exactly know what's going on, but something's changed?
Well, many of the people that I talk to are people who just aren't being heard by the people around them. One of the inspirations for my book was Marianne, who, after I spoke with her, after chatting with her, I spoke with her, and she said, "You're the first person who's accepted me for who I am." And she was 42 when she said that to me. That's horrible.
Yeah.
But I'm extremely passionate about helping people who are misunderstood.
Right.
And those are the kind of people who have been coming to me. Misunderstood because they have clairvoyant gifts.
Yeah.
And they don't have mentors around them to help them develop those gifts. Or, they have, they say they're, seeing demons or whatever, and nobody believes them. And, in Marianne's case, she was the clairvoyant, and, she grew up seeing spirits, and nobody believed her. They thought she was a witch.
Right. The whole basis of this podcast was I didn't have anybody to talk to about all this spirituality stuff. I had like 2 friends who kind of understood law of attraction and some energy stuff. And then that's how it started. I just started talking to all these people and getting everybody's perspective about it, because you can't just bring this up with anybody, like you said, without people doing the eye roll and not really listening to you. So I can't imagine how people who see, especially children, who see spirits and see energy, and how do they, I've talked to a couple people who have the gift of doing that since childhood, and it was very traumatic for them. they shut it down. They stopped being themselves. And it wasn't until they were in their 40s or 50s before they opened back up to it because of the pressure from everybody around them. So it's so important to have those resources, right?
Yes. And, the generalizations that I make in my book, and I've, partnered with a woman who's built spiritual schools in doing this part of the book, is, just having an openness to all the gifts of a child.
Yeah. Right.
Right. I mean, if you have a child who's academically gifted, put them in a fast track. Let them study, let them do that. If they're gifted in that area. The school system promotes mediocrity because it's trying to teach everything to everybody. And it's a mistake. I quote Mel Levine, Dr. Mel Levine, in one of my books, and he's works with disabled children and learning disabled children, not just disabled children. Works with learning disabled children. And at the time when I read his book, he said, I've worked with learning disabled children for 35 years and I've yet to find one.
Yeah. So I was going to say, now since COVID, right, there's a whole harsh criticism of teachers, teacher bashing all over the place. You could not escape it. And do you think that's like the sign of a revolution, that education is going to change in some way to help kids grow and not just stick them in a box like we all had as kids, and then good luck to you on the rest of your life trying to figure it out? Or do you think that people are now more understanding that there's a need for all of these different ways of teaching and learning?
I'm not sure if we're there yet. Sir Ken Robinson has been saying this for years, that the school system's broken. It kills creativity. It kills entrepreneurialism, which it does. And, the great entrepreneurs left the school system to become entrepreneurs. All the research is there. And he spent his life doing all the research on education systems and what systems work in promoting creativity and which ones don't. But are people, parents specifically, ready to let their children fail? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because the biggest learnings that successful people will tell you is how they overcame failure.
Right.
Right.
So I see that very much in a different. I was born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, and I know I am the person I am now because we were latchkey kids. Figure it out on your own. Make sure you come home before the streetlights come on.
Yeah.
And my daughter being Gen Z, I would be afraid to let her out in the street because, then you get reports of a strange white van waiting at the bus stop. And, there's a lot of difference between the way I grew up and the way she grew up, mostly because of default. Like, we had to be super extra cautious, So I tried to instill some of the 80s mindset in her, but at the same time, I became an entrepreneur so she didn't have to be home alone, so that I could be here for her through her childhood. And I can tell the difference between my independent streak and her not so much. Not that it's a negative thing. She's a kind, creative person and, she got all the good manners and those kinds of things. But I feel like a lot of her own curiosity was stilted or transferred to social media or television because it was a little safer in the house sometimes than it was to be out other places. I don't even know what I said, so hopefully that made sense.
No, I understand. You asked if society is ready, and I don't think society is ready. Too many parents want to carbon copy themselves on their children. They want them to do the same things that they did. But very few have the courage to really support a child regardless of what they want to do. I mean, I was talking to an artist here recently, a clairvoyant artist, and she said, well, my father loved me and he let me do what I wanted to do. And I said, well, did he really love you? In other words, did he encourage you to do what you wanted to do? There's a big difference between letting you do what you want to do and actually encouraging you, and he encouraged you to do your best.
Yeah. I
was given a daughter who was a singer, a violinist, and both my wife and I are non-musical. I mean, I can't sing a word, and it pushed me to find coaches for her because I couldn't help her. And that's what parents need to do, is to find coaches for the kids that they have that they don't understand. Don't just tell them to be, to iron your khakis and sit up straight.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my parents were more hands off, where they didn't know I was born premature. I'm a Sagittarius. I think I came out just ready, and then nobody kind of knew what to do with me. I still have that feeling, people still not sure exactly what to do with me, but also aren't shocked when I do these things, start a business, start a podcast. I wrote a novel just to see if I could do it. That's how I am. And they didn't stop me from doing it, but at the same time, there wasn't a lot of direction, so I had to figure that kind of out on my own.
A good friend of mine started an organization called Orphan Helpers. And what he found out in his work with orphans was that there were some really amazing kids who grew up without parents. And I said to him, maybe it's better not to have a parent if you have a bad parent. Because, and I learned that at Hoffman, that how much your parents can influence your lives. It's pretty amazing how much you can fall into traps by how your parents treated you.
And even learning about the whole cellular trauma structure, how generations and generations of that can stay in your cells and your DNA. I mean, it's very overwhelming to sort of grasp all of this information, but I keep those little nuggets in my mind, and my first thought, we had done a book they were talking about the generational part of that in the DNA, and the people reading it, because we do a book podcast, and I knew all of them at some point, we all have kids, and we were thinking, oh man, what did we screw up while we were pregnant? Were we having negative thoughts while we were pregnant? Of course we were. We were uncomfortable. We were in pain. There's lots of negativity. But it was the first thought I had, oh no, why did no one tell me this before? So I could, take precautions. That's where I get trapped. I get tripped up in all of the, what should I be doing? Should I be doing this? How am I living my best spiritual life? And I was trying to do what all of my guests were telling me. Somebody was this and somebody was that, and I was trying to do this and that, and I just became so overwhelmed that I had to quit everything. I had to just say, I'm this close to saying, I just don't want to be spiritual anymore. But then I found my groove, and then I just focus on those things, and it's working for me, and something new comes along and I adapt to it. I think people just get too overwhelmed by all of the choices and the therapies and do you have any recommendations for people who are feeling like, I don't know where to start?
Like I said, about Dr. Edward Bach, he wrote the book Heal Thyself because he said, as a doctor, he can't know more about you than you can know about yourself. Okay? And that's why, the self-discovery that I've done in my life is very, very much cherished by me. And that's what I recommend people to do, is do something that stretches you, if it's outward bound, or if something that just stretches you, and discover something about yourself.
Yeah.
discover a talent, discover something. And that's, I think, the right place to start. It's a very simple place to start. It takes time and commitment, but it's simple.
That's good advice. Like my first retreat that I ever did, I almost didn't go because I thought I can't sit on the floor for 5 days. Like that's a lot. That's too much. So I get there and they have these little chairs and cushions and pillows and blankets. And I'm like, I would have missed this whole opportunity for something as silly as that, but in that space with like-minded people, open-minded people, I really learned what my intuition felt like. Like it was so high that I was finishing people's sentences and they were just looking at me like, how did you know I was going to say that? I'm like, I don't know. And so it really helps me a lot just to be around other people who, when you speak about something spiritual, that they got it. You didn't have to sit there and explain and then fill with doubt. Like, am I crazy talking about this? And here we are on Slightly Unmeditated for that exact reason, because every week I get to talk to somebody else and it keeps me in the flow and reminding me, and I'm also noticing that the universe is speaking through my guests. Like I'll have a question that's been on my mind and my guest will come on and just give me the answer and I'll be like, what just you think I'd be used to it by now, but I'm still sort of every week I'm still like in wonder about it. So it's a fun way to live.
Yeah, I go to this retreat that's 7 days long in the Alps with about 350 people. And there's doctors and nurses and spiritual healers and clairvoyants who are there. And what I always found interesting is that when I'm talking to somebody, I'll realize that I'm talking to myself. That I'm telling somebody something, and I just say, "Oh,
that's crazy."
That was for me.
Right? It's sometimes it pays to talk to yourself, right? Yeah, I find that like I just had my epiphany earlier. I feel those, and it hasn't happened on the show actually in a really long time. So that must have been your message to me, the universe message through you. But that real-time train of thought where you're like putting all the pieces together, and you're like, oh, wait a second. I think that's a really cool experience. Two questions. Is your wife on the same sort of journey, spiritual journey, or does she just let you do your thing?
My wife is on her spiritual journey. Yes. She's the one who led me to this group in Switzerland. I followed it much quicker than she did. My daughter is much further along the path of her spiritual journey than either of us. She's an indigo child and an empath, and just
did she recover her speech?
Yes.
Okay.
It took about 4 years, but she's getting back to be who she is. But she never lost her true self. I mean,
right.
She's had some horrible things happen to her in her life, but she's never gone dark. She's never gotten mad about it. She's never blamed anybody for it. She's just accepted it as it was, which is really wonderful to see.
Yeah, that's actually been a very strong theme in my life for the last few months as well. So that's very validating that you just said that. Because you start to worry, like, am I too bright and light? Or, so it's nice to hear that other people are also, able to find that in themselves and kind of live that way instead of just running into all the dark parts of it.
Well, she and I have that in common. She's much better at it than I am, but I'm an optimist. I've had, many things that's happened to me in my life, but I'm still optimistic.
So you're in Switzerland. Is it more is spirituality commonplace there, or is it kind of like here where it's just who you know?
Well, for one thing, there is a spiritual registry in Switzerland. So if you're working as a clairvoyant or as a spiritual healer, you can register in the official registry, and they have clairvoyants there that will test you in your abilities. If you go into a typical drugstore here and talk to the druggist, they'll show you a plethora of different treatments, whether aromatherapy, Bach therapy, Schussler salts, the mineral treatments, the flower treatments. They're very knowledgeable in all different things. And, some of the biggest crystal shops you'll find here in Switzerland.
Wow.
So, yes, it is an extremely spiritual place.
That's good to have those resources, because I'm in a rural area.
No, I understand.
Not a lot of people are. Yeah.
I understand. I've lived in those rural areas too. No, what really impressed me, because I became Swiss about 20 years ago, and I had to write an essay to become Swiss. But what really impressed me was the preamble to the Swiss Constitution, which was rewritten in 1999. And in the preamble, it says, we measure ourselves on the least of our citizens. We measure our success on the least of our citizens. I mean, It's amazing.
Maybe that's the other message to me. Move to Switzerland. No, I'm so happy that I got a little piece of that too about Switzerland. Like, obviously we haven't been able to travel safely in a while, and so I am curious about going to different places, and I don't have an intuitive sense of where I'm supposed to move to. Right. I know I'm supposed to go somewhere, but it hasn't hit me yet where that place is. So I'm always investigating everywhere.
Okay. I was drawn here 32 years ago.
And it worked out.
A call out of the blue to, leave Texas and go to Switzerland.
Are you still working as an engineer?
Sometimes now. I've worked in investment management. I am on the board of a production company in California, film production. And then I work helping entrepreneurs here in Europe, help to raise capital for their companies and help them, set up their companies.
Right. Nice.
We're a group of entrepreneurs who help other entrepreneurs who don't have as much gray hair as we do.
I just did mine this morning. All right. So do you have any final parting words of wisdom? You don't have to. I was just leaving the door open. I'll share your information online and, to help people if they're interested. I'd be curious, like, how many people would feel more comfortable with somebody who was an engineer talking about spirituality versus some, some more, eclectic person, and I understand how scary those people can be, or sometimes even intimidating some spirituality people can be. So I like having these conversations because I've actually have proof now that people are like, I heard you. People will call my guests and say, I heard you on the podcast, and I think you're the person I'm supposed to talk to. And it's the most exhilarating feeling ever. So for me, well,
maybe a good ending is this,
yes.
And that is, as an engineer, I looked at the history of society, and I've written a number of papers and published a number of papers about what I found as far as the history goes. When Galileo was fighting against the church, where did he go? Do you know where he went?
No.
He went back to the Ionian Greeks. He went back to Euclid. He went back to Pythagoras to reestablish the knowledge that existed, 2,500 years ago, but the church had denied. When Erwin Schrödinger, Schrödinger's cat, I don't know if you heard that term.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I did, yeah.
He was with Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein in the debate about quantum mechanics, and after he got his Nobel Prize, he said, "How could we be so dumb? Where did we go wrong?" So he went back into history and tried to figure out where science had gone off the rails, right?
Right.
He took the same path that Galileo took, and so he went back to Democritus, to Pythagoras, Euclid, Archimedes, Socrates. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go and study those people, they're the founders of mathematics, right? Geometry,
Right.
basically the founders of Western science. They're all spiritualists. If you read Socrates, he talks more about God and the spirits than he talks about logic. But yet he's the father of logic.
Interesting.
Okay, and what I discovered, and Schrodinger said this quite well in the book that he wrote. He said, a student of Democritus, and Democritus was the one who theorized correctly the structure of the atom 2,500 years ago. Okay, he theorized the structure of the solar system correctly, and it took Galileo to rediscover what he had done, right?
Right.
But Schrodinger said a student of Democritus could learn about structure of the atom, could learn about mathematics, about geometry, about music, about love, and about God. Because these people were holists. They weren't specialists. They understood the material laws, and they also understood that those material laws are based on spiritual laws. And the theories that they created 2,500 years ago are still valid today.
Yeah. So, why was a lot of that part like ignored? Is it because it didn't advance anybody financially?
Well, you can read my books.
Okay.
The Roman Empire basically destroyed logic in order to rule the people.
Yeah.
You know, they created the concept of eternal damnation and used it to run their slave-based society.
Right.
And to rule with threat. And the best threat you can use is eternal damnation.
Of course.
And like I said, Galileo rediscovered it. Others have rediscovered it. And that's the discussions I have with scientists, engineers. Just go back to those people. History has proven that they were right. So why not look at everything that they wrote?
Right.
Pythagoras was a musician. Socrates was a sculptor. He carved the 6 women who hold up the roof on the Parthenon.
Right.
They were his wife that he carved in 6 different poses. These were multi-talented, very knowledgeable, spiritual people. Yeah. Who understood how the world worked. And I think, and this is what Schrodinger says, we have to get back to this holistic science.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I see a lot more people. I'm actually going to an expo this weekend. I'm so excited to be amongst my people because it gets draining, just having a few conversations online every week. But I'm really excited to sort of just connect with other people to keep the flow going. And while you're talking about all these, people who are spiritual, I'm like getting excited more and more to just be around other people. I'm realizing how much I need that.
Yeah, it was a great discovery to go and study those different people, and somebody like Joan of Arc. She's one I spent a lot of time studying, and she's just a fantastic, spiritual person who was brought here and saved France from Britain. And they killed her for it.
Right.
And it's disgusting.
Yeah. I could listen to these stories forever, but I suppose if we read your book, so your book is a trilogy, but then you have a fourth book. Is it separate from that, or is it part of it? What are a 4-book series if not a trilogy?
Well, the first book is torn between science and religion. The second book is torn between rhetoric and wisdom, and the third book is torn between the ethereal world and the material world.
Okay, that's
so those are and then the last book is torn between modern medicine and spiritual healing.
Okay.
So it was a trilogy, but because I didn't plan on writing the fourth one. But the fourth one is in the same vein of, how do I navigate between spiritual healing and modern medicine?
Right. Well, I will post those online too for anyone interested in reading it. And I thank you for talking to me. I know we had some technical difficulties, but ultimately I think there's a lot of good information that I'm glad I learned today. So.
Well, I appreciated it. And, I'm happy to talk to people. It's something that I've just learned that I'm good at. So.
Apparently. Well, that's amazing. For everybody listening, I hope that you've learned a little something about yourself and feel inspired to keep learning. Remember, new episodes of Slightly Unmeditated drop every Thursday, and you can listen on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. You reach out on the website at slightlyunmeditated.com, Facebook, or Instagram. And until we meet again, I am sending you all positive energy and sincere gratitude. I am Tisha, and I will always be slightly unmeditated.